In 1980, a friend of mine by the name of Brian, he was also the friend who introduced me to Dungeons and Dragons in 1978, he gave me this sheet of paper. What's on this sheet of paper would change the way that I approached Dungeons and Dragons, and it would also continue to influence my approach to role-playing games until the present day. Stick around, I'll tell you what it is. So what exactly was this piece of paper that had such an impact on the way that I play Dungeons and Dragons? Well, this photocopy, this is the original photocopy that Brian gave me back in 1980. I keep everything that I've ever touched that has to do with Dungeons and Dragons. This photocopy came out of a book called the Arduin Grimoire. Now, back in the 1970s, there was a man by the name of David Hargrave who took to playing Dungeons and Dragons really early on. Mm-hmm. And David Hargrave was a combat photographer in the Vietnam War, and he served a 6-year tour of duty over there, or maybe 2 tours, whatever the tours were at that time. He was there for 6 years. Very often he was on the front lines of combat doing his job. When he got back from Vietnam in the 1970s, it's likely that he automatically, or immediately, I guess I should say, took to playing Dungeons and Dragons. Because by the mid-1970s, David Hargrave had decided that Dungeons and Dragons didn't go far enough in terms of creativity. It didn't go as far as it should in terms of realism. And so David Hargrave had taken to making his own rules for a game that he ran in I believe it was the San Francisco Bay Area. He had taken to creating his own rules to enhance Dungeons and Dragons. Enough people liked what he was doing. People clamored for more and more of this, and they liked what he was doing so much that they encouraged him to actually publish all of these new rules that he was coming up with. And this sheet that my friend Brian gave me came out of the first book that David Hargrave published. What this one is, we'll start here. And we're going to look at some of these other books that David Hargrave came out with. But what this page is there are 2 tables. One is called the critical hit table. The other one is called Hargrave's fumble table. And originally TSR didn't really go for the critical hit concept or the fumble concept. A number was a number to them, and you either made your correct roll or not. There was no benefit for rolling a 20 or a problem for rolling a 1. David Hargrave didn't think that was the way that it should be.
Thank you, David Hargrave.
So when we look at this, I'm just going to read a couple of the things off of the critical hit table to give you an idea of what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. So the idea being that when you rolled a 20, there was a percentage chance that you would have something extraordinary happen, either to you from being hit by a 20 or from you hitting someone or something with a 20 on your 20-sided die in combat. Mm-hmm. So first off, number 1 through 2. If you roll you get your critical hit, you roll a percentage dice. Mm-hmm. And to give you examples, like I said, rolling a 1 or a 2, you got hit in the head, the front of your head, or you hit your opponent in the front of the head. Your brain was penetrated. Your brain was penetrated, or your opponent's brain was penetrated, and there was immediate death. So this gives you kind of an idea of the realism that David Hargrave was expecting there to be. Mm-hmm. If you rolled a 3 or a 4 on that percentage dice, or your opponent rolled that, there would be a strike to the front of your neck, which resulted in your voice box being ruined, with total voice loss of your character from then on. A couple of other examples: head general, for instance, 43 to 44, stunned, 1 to 10 melee rounds, no fighting. But then you go to the other side of these tables, and you're on the Hargrave fumble table.
The fumble table. It's so fun.
So some of them aren't so bad. Others are not good at all. You would have to roll a 1, and then there was a percentage chance that you would roll a percentage dice and go to this table to see what happened. So it's not going to happen every time, but there's a strong chance that it will. Rolling 1 through 5, glancing blow. You do your damage is 1/2 normal if the next time that you have an attack. Mm. There is 26 through 30, your opponent grabs your weapon hand. 56 to 60, you bump into an ally. which causes them to have a bad attack. Getting up into the higher numbers of the percentage, if you roll an 86 to 90, you hit the wrong target. If you roll a 93 or 94, your magical weapon, should you have one, breaks. If you roll a 98, of course, you critical hit your nearest ally. If you roll a 99, you critical hit yourself. And then if you roll a 100, you roll 3 times on the table again, and you have to apply all 3 of those events. This was something that back in the day, I need to try and explain this, because for a lot of people this might seem like normal events nowadays. But back in 1978, 79, 80, when we were first starting to play the game, we were using these books. This is what we had to operate under. And for us to further our investment in the game, we were constantly on the lookout for other publications that would give us ideas. Now, nowadays you can find ideas anywhere. But back then, anything that came out that might give you a different perspective, a different look, maybe it's a new list of treasures, maybe it was a new list of monsters, maybe it was a new list of magical spells. Anything that we could gather up, we would purchase. And and David Hargrave and his Arduin Grimoire series filled that bill perfectly. Now, if you look, this is the first copy. This is the first edition, not a first edition, but this is the first book, I guess I should say, of the Arduin Grimoire Trilogy. If you look, it's very similar to the TSR book that came out at roughly the same time. So was David Hargrave trying to piggyback onto what TSR was creating? Absolutely. I have no doubt.
Who's to say?
Who's to say? But to me, it looks suspicious that these are almost exactly the same. But to those of us that were playing at the table, as far as we were concerned, it didn't matter. This was giving us supplemental material to expand our game. And David Hargrave and the Arduin Grimoire Trilogy didn't disappoint. David had his own game, as I mentioned, out in the San Francisco Bay Area. And these were things that he had already integrated into his campaign. But it's not like you were going to use, most people I knew anyway, were not going to use everything that was in these books and integrate all of it into your own campaign, for your own Dungeons & Dragons campaign. But there was a lot of cool stuff in here that gave you food for thought that you could take and put in. And that was one of the things that David Hargrave talked about when he created this. He mentioned, don't expect to use this as a standalone game system. Later on, he tried to create a standalone game system. But initially, it was just, here's some cool stuff that you can integrate into your D&D campaign to make it more realistic and to make it more expansive and to make it more imaginative. And as far as I'm concerned, he knocked it out of the park with these 3 books.
Some of the stuff in these is remarkable in terms of the creativity that he came up with. It's not, it's not better than Dungeons & Dragons necessarily, but it allows you, like he's been saying, it brings a whole new wealth of ideas to the table that a lot of people, myself included, never would have considered without him coming up with these things.
And really, I encourage you to keep in mind as you watch this video, some of the things that we're going to be mentioning, they're everywhere to be found nowadays. But back in the day, it was David Hargrave who came up with a lot of these original ideas. And to me, he is one of the giants in the development of not just Dungeons & Dragons, but role-playing games in general. But let me stop with my praise of David Hargrave, because I can get carried away when I'm talking about the man. Let's take a look at some of the things in the books that I think you might find of interest. And that back in the day, it kind of blew us away when we were comparing what we had in some of these books. Some of the stuff that David Hargrave came up with blew us away. Now, well, let's go there first. Let's talk about that first. And then we have a couple more things to talk about. So we're going to take a quick look through the first book of the Arduin Grimoire Trilogy. One of the things that you like most in this is the new character classes.
It's true.
That he came up with. Go ahead. Read through some of the ones that you think are most interesting.
If you're like me, sometimes when you're creating a character, that seems a little bit limiting especially if you don't even have any of the other books surrounding Dungeons & Dragons, and you're just using the player's handbook to try and come up. You don't have Unearthed Arcana or anything like those. You're just trying to come up with what you can using the player's handbook. It can be limiting. So some of these allow for very creative differences. You can be a merchant, you can be a trader, you can be a psychic, which could be fun. There's a character type called the Technos, which means that you're kind of an engineer, scientist, almost steampunk
kind of.
type
And
person.
you don't believe in magic, and everything has to be mechanically inclined, which to me is really cool.
Yeah.
And David Hargrave was really well known for integrating science fiction into his role play, his Dungeons and Dragons campaign. And I mean, we've done that from time to time.
Yeah, sometimes we do.
Something, you know, well, I won't tell you on video because there are people who might be watching this trying to get some information, but science-based things, I'll say, can have made an appearance.
Yeah. You can be a rune weaver. You can be a witch hunter, which is cool. You can be a medicine man. Yeah, the witch hunter is interesting. Think almost The Witcher, if you've seen that. It's kind of along those lines of monster hunter, evil hunter type of character. And it's things like that where you could be the 16 strength fighter that you always are, or you could go a whole different route and you could play a whole character that's a merchant, and the adventures that you have going around trying to sell spices or whatever it is that you're trying to do, it adds, for people who really love the role-playing aspect of the game, it allows new avenues that you can go down and new adventures that you can explore and have that you wouldn't be able to have otherwise, which is really cool.
Yeah, and that's not to say that as you couldn't take a D&D fighter and have them do merchant things, but there are specific bonuses that David Hargrave mentions in the trader class that he describes that you think, well, yeah, that's actually a really nice bonus to have on this. But he goes out of his way to actually explain a lot of these things to you in these books. And again, back in the day, that was really amazing to us. He does a lot of new and unusual spells. Give you one example. Let's see. There is Stafford Starbridge. Stafford was a friend of his who played in his campaign. A rainbow-hued bridge, course skating light, 5 feet wide, 20 feet long per level. It will carry any weight, can not be hit by non-magical things, and can be keyed to support any single type, letting all others fall through. So you could have your party be able to run across the bridge, anybody else who is following after. So you could throw this across a chasm, you and your party could run across the bridge, anybody else that you hadn't keyed into it would fall through. Those are the kinds of things that were coming up. But, you know, have other people come up with magic items like this since then? You bet. But this is where some of these ideas got their start.
Yeah.
Some of the magical treasures, he came up with no end of new treasures that you could end up putting into your campaign. One of them is the oil of instant immolation, one of my favorites. The effect, spread it on anything, and 3 minutes after exposure to air, it bursts into super hot flames that do 6 to 60 points of fire damage. Yeah.
Nice.
But again, more and more things in here. And on page 60 and 61 of this original Arduin book, that's where my friend Brian got the critical hit table and the Hargrave fumble table. And for those of you who say, well, yeah, we've got critical hits now, guess where it started? Right here with David Hargrave. Some other things of interest that we've made notes of. There's a brawl chart in here for just going out and having a brawl as opposed to
trying to kill
weapon
people.
Combat.
Yeah.
Another one I love here is his Rainbow Fog and Mist. Random Fog and Mist generation chart for dungeon rooms. So it gives you different types of mist that you can put into your campaign that will do certain things to people. Again, really creative stuff that I have come to love over the years.
Have you come to use that a few times?
Maybe.
Yeah.
Hey, but you know what? It's not my fault if people open up a door and go, that mist looks green.
Walk in there.
Yeah, I mean, come on. It's on you guys for doing this stuff.
I'm not saying anything.
I'm just giving the opportunity. If you choose to do so,
Presents
it is
itself.
Entirely up to you.
Free will.
Going on a little bit further, let's look at just a couple of things out of the second edition of the Arduin Trilogy, of the Arduin Grimoire Trilogy. Again, just some new character types that he put into here. There's the star-powered mage, which to me is one of the more interesting mages. If you've seen some of our older videos, you know that I like to investigate different styles of magic. I don't think that all magic users should be practicing one particular type of magic. I've got magic users who use food. I've got weapon magic users. I have magic used in a lot of different ways. I got my ideas from David Hargrave. One of his mages that came out in the second book is the star-powered mage. With a little bit of tweaking, what it's become for me is a wizard that goes out and uses starlight and starlight and a star power that they can absorb every night in order to cast spells. But it limits what spells they do, but they're more powerful because they're so focused on that particular type of magic. But the star-powered mage, one of my favorites from David Hargrave. There is a rune singer mage, which they specialize in putting runes on things. Again, a lot of cool stuff that you could do as a rune singer mage.
But you wouldn't be able to do as just a traditional magic user,
That's
illusionist, yeah.
That's it. There is the outlaw. There is the slaver. You could get a lot of cool adventures out of being a slaver. But those give you some idea of the kinds of things that David Hargrave was tossing out there.
Yeah, you could be a politician as a character, and I think that could be exciting. You could have a lot of fun with that.
If you have a creative dungeon master who's helping, who's running the campaign, and you're working with them to create that kind of a scenario, it could be a lot of fun.
An experience, yeah.
At a later date, David Hargrave got together. He was still working on my favorite, critical hit table and the fumble table. And this is a really interesting thing in this second book. The following section, this is again, real medicine and fantasy gaming. The following section was researched and written by my close friend, Dr. William Voorhees. As a specialist in internal medicine, he has a remarkable insight into rationalizing game magic and medical facts. This is reflected in his true critical hit table, which is a new one for here, which may be used in conjunction with the critical hit tables of the original book that I just showed you, the one that Brian gave me. But it accurately reflects the devastating effects of certain types of hits and the attendant difficulty in healing such wounds. So he went to a doctor and got him to give his input, the doctor's input, into what would happen if you received a medieval weapon, some sort of medieval weapon, blunt force trauma or slicing trauma. Yeah. And so there are other things in here where critical hits, if you ended up getting hit in the spine, instant death. You can end up being led to becoming a paraplegic. So there are a lot of different things that, again, based on his desire for realism, David Hargrave put into his campaign and then subsequently put into these books that a lot of us ended up integrating into our D&D.
And with what we've been saying all along, with one of our more popular and controversial videos, You Need to Die, why AD&D is more dangerous than other editions, we talk a lot about what we think is the importance of having danger in the games that you're playing, and how if you can go into a fight and you've got a lot of hit points, you're doing well, but then you get clipped in the spine and you're a quadriplegic, there's a threat there that no matter how powerful you are, there's still always these underlying things. Things can go wrong.
And the critical hit table, it doesn't matter what level you are. It doesn't matter what armor class you are.
No.
You get hit by the critical of David Hargrave.
You could be in some real trouble, and you can kill other members of your party. So it adds a little bit of fear to make characters make more careful decisions.
And that's what I'm referring to when I say that the work of David Hargrave, starting with this page that Brian gave me, the work of David Hargrave really influenced my game. That's what makes me want to have a dangerous campaign. That's what makes me want to have something where you can die no matter what level you are. And around the corner, I have an adage that I've added into my campaign that no matter what level you are, there is something that can kill you within 5 miles. And that's something that I've told my players over and over again, and they all know it. But that's been my adage ever since I was really introduced to the work of David Hargrave and the fact that he believes that realism and danger make a better game. Moving on to a couple of other things, and then we'll be wrapping this video up. Some of the monsters that David Hargrave came up with. A couple of my favorites. The first is the Kill Kitten. These lovable, cuddly, purring, fuzzy little cats are sure to melt even the hardest heart. They pretend to have a broken leg or some other hurt and limp, whimpering toward a victim, with their big soulful eyes pleading for aid. When the tender-hearted soul picks them up to comfort and help them, the little creatures dig their steel-hard and needle-sharp little claws into them, pumping them full of a fatal poison. Save versus poison still results. If you make a save versus the poison, you still result. You end up with paralysis for up to 6 days. So the Kill Kittens usually travel in packs of 12 to 48. Although all of the others usually wait until their decoy has gone out and bagged some sort of a kill. So that's one of them. One of my other funny one of the other funny ones, I find this is a funny one. I've never had the kill kitten. I've always wanted to have the kill kittens in my campaign, but I never have.
We would lose it.
They wouldn't play with me.
No.
Again. But the other one that I actually have had once or twice is the Thunder Bunny. And Thunder Bunnies are creatures where they're basically rabbits, but they travel in enormous herds, and it's like the buffalo herd of old in North America, 10,000 of them running across the plains. You don't want to be in their way. You don't want to get in the way of Thunder Bunnies either. But these, again, some of it may seem a little bit crazy, nutty, but there are other things in here that are really just unbelievably creative and fun to put into your campaign. As you can see in this image, David Hargrave took out an ad in Dragon Magazine talking about his Arduin Grimoire series. The Dragon Magazine ran it, but then they realized that he was really kind of using Dungeons and Dragons and piggybacking onto what they had created, and so they decided that this was not going to be such a good idea. Mm-hmm. But there does seem to be some sort of effect from, some sort of impact of David Hargrave's work on TSR and Gary Gygax, because if you look at the Dungeon Master's Guide, the AD&D Dungeon Master's Guide, you'll see something called the Vacuous Grimoire. Gary Gygax came up with the Vacuous Grimoire to do a backhanded attack on the Arduin Grimoire series. Because if you read the Vacuous Grimoire in AD&D, you will lose, I believe it's 2 intelligence and 1 wisdom. So, and I'm not criticizing Gary Gygax and the folks at TSR for doing this.
You can't blame them.
You can't. They were trying to make money. I'm not going to point fingers and say they shouldn't have done that and they shouldn't have tried to shut this creativity down. But they were a little bit peeved.
They weren't thrilled.
They weren't thrilled. They were a little peeved that there was such a close. There was such an attempt to link Dungeons and Dragons and the Arduin Grimoire together. Mm-hmm. But those of us out in the field, like I was saying, we didn't care. We bought this regardless of who published it because it was so full of creative ideas.
Yeah.
Later on, David Hargrave decided he did have there was a cease and desist letter from TSR that said you can't use the words Dungeons and Dragons in your Arduin Grimoire series. So he started referring to Dungeons and Dragons in the later editions of his books as other fantasy rule systems. But, again, those of us playing the game, we knew exactly what was being referred to.
Everyone knows exactly what's being referred to.
That's it. And David Hargrave eventually, though, decided that he wanted to take the Arduin Grimoire rules and turn them into a standalone game system, which he attempted to do. It was never terribly successful, and I think the reason for that is because people weren't buying this as an alternative to D&D. They were buying it as a supplement to D&D. Mm-hmm. And in that, I think that he succeeded beyond even his imagination at the time. If you buy these, is it going to be a great read? Yes, it is. Is it going to be something that's going to be easy to follow? No, it's not. Because it is convoluted. It is
very complicated.
It's not written terribly well. It's not something that flows easily from place to place. He gives a lot of emphasis to some of the new character classes and gives really short shrift to some of the others. Mm-hmm. I think it was based on what he thought were the really cool ones.
Yeah.
That notwithstanding, I don't think I have ever really, outside of the initial books of Dungeons and Dragons, the Holmes Basic, which I absolutely love, and some of the AD&D material, I don't think I have found anything since then that is as interesting and as fun as the Arduin Grimoire series is.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, David Hargrave died at a very early age. But the impact that he had on the game, for those of you who have never read this, and you may read this and say, well, this stuff is, we do this stuff all the time now. This is where it started. It was 1977, 1978, with David Hargrave deciding that he wanted to expand what Dungeons and Dragons was. Mm. Like I said, David Hargrave died at an early age. Some of us, we have a lot of conversations with people here on the channel. We get private emails. We get things in the comments section that we would like to try and respond to. One of the friends that we've made in Italy talked about, in one of our conversations, talked about being able to play this game because of the efforts of people that have gone before. Mm. And to me, we play the game. I enjoy the game much more so because of the efforts of David Hargrave. So, Marco, to David Hargrave. Anyway, that's a quick look at the Arduin Grimoire series. You can still pick these books up on eBay. They're pretty darned expensive now because there weren't that many of them published, but you still can pick these up. And if you do have the chance to pick one up, if you find one at a garage sale, I highly recommend that you do because they're a great read. Even though they're convoluted and crazy, the insane creativity that's contained in these books is almost beyond belief.
Yeah.
I highly recommend getting a copy.
Yeah.
Copies.
They'll inspire you to do a lot of new things and give you a lot of new ideas, which is, that's the point of this whole thing.
Exactly.
So, can't hurt.
Well, it can hurt your player, but
yeah, it hurts me.
It hurts him a lot.
Makes me sad.
These games that we play with using charts like this, but it's fun regardless.
It is.
It's a good time.
So go get some.
That's all I've got. David Hargrave, Arduin Grimoire series, first published in 1977, I believe, for the next several years. Great stuff. Check it out. Go to our webpage. Go to our coffee page for more information about where we're headed with things here in the next few months.
Absolutely.
And if you have any questions, comments, comment in the section below on this, or send us an email. Or if you have any ideas or you played with the Arduin Grimoire series, we'd love to hear about your experiences with it.
We would.
I'm Jim.
I'm Alex.
Keep your sword on, pretty.
Bye-bye.